MLK is a historical figure that conservatives always hated, but used to pretend like they like because it was political suicide not to. They would always give the whole judged by the content of the character clip of the I Have a Dream speech while forgetting everything else. But this is Fox News conservatism. These days, it, I guess, is coming to an end because last year, I believe, Steven Crowder attacked MLK, and now we have Charles Kirkland Jr., one of my favorite in conservative media. His real name is Charlie Kirk. I'm going to call him Charles Kirkland Jr., but let's go ahead and see what he has to say. The deification of MLK and his proto-DIE ideology marks the exact moment that the progress of Black America goes sideways. Their cities disintegrate, their families collapse, educational progress stagnates, they become enormously dependent on government support. Crime explodes, and 25% of Black men are incarcerated by age 25. You will know the tree by its fruit. Now, given the time period Charles Kirkland Jr. is talking about, a lot of things happened during that time period, even before that time period, that put Black communities back years and years and years. And that's not even mentioning the discrimination that they faced by political policy, by all these different hate groups. So let's go over just a few of them. So for one, we have the Tulsa Race Massacre, which white supremacists went in Tulsa, killed many Black people, including destroying many of the wealthiest Black communities, which has a long-lasting impact in terms of Black generational wealth, because that's how there's so many different groups of people, or so many people who have so much money, because they have generational wealth built up. That has to come up from the ground up. And when you go and kill or damage all these Black-owned businesses, all these wealthy Black people, that sets generations back. And not only from a financial standpoint, from a knowledge standpoint, which can be passed down to their children, to their children's children. And it puts a stop to that because now you have wiped it out essentially. And then there was the Civil Rights Act, which was passed in 1964. But wait a minute, because there's more to that. Because not even a decade later, you had Nixon, who became president and started the war on drugs. And a former Nixon top aide came out, and yeah, they admitted they targeted Black people and hippies. Here's a quote from them. This is a Business Insider article. John Ellerishman, Nixon's aide on domestic affairs, who would eventually get convicted in the Watergate scandal, had a plan for them. Brom wrote that Ellerishman, following his very public scrutiny and conviction, had little left to protect and came clean about a shocking truth. You want to know what this is really about, Ellerishman asked, referring to the war on drugs. And here's the quote. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities, we could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the nightly news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. So that is a direct quote from a prominent member of the Nixon administration, basically admitting, yeah, we targeted Black people, we broke up their families, we broke up their leaders, and we set them back. And we did it on purpose, knowing at the time we were lying. It's what they did. And that's not even mentioning the Lee Atwater interview back in 1981. I'm not sure I can show the quote, so I won't. I'll just go ahead and pan back to my face for a bit, but I'll go ahead and read this too. I'm sure you might have heard about it before, but if you haven't, I'll go ahead and read it. This article is from The Nation. I'll leave all of it in the description. So here we go. The late legendarily brutal campaign consultant Lee Atwater explains how Republicans can win the vote of racist without sounding racist themselves. Now, keep in mind, this is part of the Southern strategy. Republicans and conservatives will always tell you, oh, no, it didn't happen. No, it didn't happen. It did happen. And it still happens today. You start out in 1954 by saying N-word, N-word, N-word. By 1968, you can't say N-word. That hurts you. Backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all of that stuff. And you're getting so abstract, now you're talking about cutting taxes. And all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things. And a byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. We want to cut this is much more abstract than even the busing thing. And a hell of a lot more abstract than N-word, 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 which he is correct. This is what happens in politics. This is how it's played, especially back then. They were public enemy number one, number two. Black people were up there on the list of people to bring down because they realized that after the civil rights passed in 1964, that things had to fundamentally change and they couldn't be as openly racist anymore. So they had to kind of cloak their racism. They kind of had to shield their racism because they knew it wouldn't be accepted anymore. So now they have to do all of these different things to basically promote their racism and promote white nationalism, white supremacy. And it's still going on right now, like with people like, example, Charlie Kirk. So let's go ahead and one more thing is the result of all this poverty, it leads to crime, by the way. So let's go ahead and go on to the next person, because it's not just Charlie Kirk spreading his genius here. We have Matt Walsh, just an absolute beast of a character right here. So let's go ahead and go on to what he has to say about MLK. A lot of the people, wait a minute, let's go ahead and change over to Twitter. Here we go. A lot of people are upset about the criticisms of MLK Jr. today, but these floodgates opened a long time ago. Our historical heroes, by the way, to him, have been torn down. We've been told to focus on their sins and shortcomings. Columbus has been labeled a genocidal killer. Jefferson was nothing but a slaveholder, etc. Well, if this is the standard, then we have to talk about the fact that MLK was a communist, a plagiarist, an adulterer, an abuser, allegedly a sexual abuser. Don't know if I want to say the R word on YouTube, and more. If you don't want to hear about this, then you should have spoken up louder in defense of men like Columbus. But you didn't. And so here we are, one standard for all, like it or not. So the idea that he's going to compare MLK to Columbus is laughable. Now, keep in mind, Columbus is labeled a genocidal killer because he was a genocidal killer. And nobody is saying that Jefferson was only a slaveholder. I mean, he did more than just be a slave holder. But being a slaveholder was a big part of who Jefferson was. It was a big part of his life. It was a big part of all the influence that he had. I had something in my mouth. But anyways, Jefferson was yes, he was a president, but he also had estimated up to 6 kids with a slave by the name of Sally Hemings, which was later proven by a DNA test. This was posted on the New York Times back in 1998. Walsh calls MLK a commie. Now, it is true that MLK was more radical, even compared to politicians today. let's bring up a few quotes of what he said real quick of MLK. Here we go. Let's go down here. As long as there is poverty in the world, no man can be totally rich, even if he has $1 billion. God never here's for the Christians out here. God never intended for one group of people to live in superfluous inordinate wealth. I can't speak. I actually can't speak. But while others live in abject, deadening poverty. A second evil which plagues the modern world is that of poverty. Like a monstrous octopus, it projects its nagging, prehensile tentacles in lands and villages all over the world. Almost 2/3 of the people of the world go to bed hungry at night. They are undernourished, ill-housed, and shabbily clad. Many of them have no houses or beds to sleep in. Their only beds are the sidewalks, talking about homeless people, of the cities and the dusty roads of the villages. Most of these poverty-stricken children of God have never seen a physician or a dentist. There is nothing new about poverty. What is new, however, is that we have the resources to get rid of it. The rich nations must use their vast resources of wealth to develop the underdeveloped, school the unschooled, and feed the unfed. Ultimately, a great nation is a compassionate nation. No individual or nation can be great if it does not have concern for the least of these. So, so this is like, to Matt Walsh, very like scary things to hear, because Matt Walsh is conservative and he has this survival of the fittest mentality. But these are also quotes you probably didn't hear in school. Now, let's go back to his plagiarism claims, cheating. Now, all of those things are bad, but they're not go and genocide the natives bad. They're not holding humans as slaves bad, turning humans into property levels bad. And to the last claim about him doing the sexual assault, in 2009, there was a report that came from the FBI at the time, who had wiretaped him, by the way, in an onslaught against MLK because he was very unpopular at the time. During MLK's life, people hated him. And in this report, however, it claimed that MLK had watched a colleague commit sexual assault while he laughed and gave advice. Now, from my understanding, this was from an FBI report from that period with no actual audio. Some historians, to give the full context here, debated the accuracy because this was the FBI that spied on him, plotted against him, and even sent him a letter telling him to off himself. Now, this report could be true. It could be. But I would say right here, even if the report is true, in comparison to Columbus, that the idea that MLK's entire legacy revolves around sexual assault is inaccurate compared to the fact that Jefferson, his entire legacy is tied to the fact that he owned slaves. Over 600 to some historical accounts. This was a man born into the planter class of the time, which meant that he had vast resources, whether it was financial or social connections, all tied to European colonization and plantations mostly ran by slaves. And the excuse that people will give, like Matt Walsh, is, they were a product of the era, except that President John Adams didn't have slaves. And also at the time, there was a thing called abolitionism. It was a thing. People were into it at the time. So even for his time, Jefferson was a bad person. He was a piece of crap. So let's go ahead and go on to Matt Walsh next couple of tweets here, because he has two more. Let's see here. Here we go. I know a lot of you want to play by a rule that says every white historical figure must be reassessed while every non-white historical figure remains canonized. But what you don't understand is that we do not recognize these arbitrary rules anymore. they've gone out the window. One standard and one standard only. And this is the standard that we're still keeping. Personally, hold on, let's read this one too, actually. Personally, I would like to go back to a time when we honored our heroes and built statues to them and shows to focus on their achievements rather than their flaws. However great those flaws may have been. But at this point, if there is any chance of getting back there, it will only happen when people see how grim it will get when the current standard is actually applied equally. Now, I already made the case why MLK, a statue of MLK is much more relevant than a statue of somebody's like entire legacy being the result of owning people and impregnating people that they owned as property. But let's talk about these statues because, for example, people were really mad at the statue of Robert E. Lee being taken down. And by the way, Robert E. Lee specifically said not to make statues of him, but conservatives and all these Confederates did it anyway. And people like Lee don't need statues, nor does any Confederate, because the Confederates aren't Americans. They were traitors. They attacked America in Fort Sumter. Now, you're going to have all these conservatives, which are slowly but surely doing the lost cause myth, as well as the notion of the Northern aggression. But it's absolute nonsense. At the end of the day, the Confederates were traitors. They aren't Americans. They're anti-American. They literally went to war with Americans. They got their ass kicked by Americans. They don't need a statue. It should be torn down. Good. So at the end of the day here, the main point I want to get at is that this is another year where you have more cope from anti-MLK conservatives. And they're just out here now saying it. I mean, I guess at least they're being honest, at least. I guess it's better than the past. But at the same time, these conservatives will come out and say, I wonder why black people vote Democrat in recent history. Oh, by the way, MLK, blah, 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 you know. So what could you expect from people like Charles Kirkland Jr. and Matt Walsh?